Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. So after a quite long vacation, we are commencing our lecture series, the second leg of our lecture series. In the previous one, we were able to complete the topic which was called ultimacy, which is a quite interesting topic, and I hope that we were able to manage to convey the idea, at least the basic ideas of what the ultimacy is according to the Theravada tradition. So if we summarize that what we have done so far, we have emphasized on the fact that according to the Theravada tradition, there are certain natures that do exist. According to it, what we experience, the objects that we experience, are not synthetically produced by mind. It means they are not illusions. There was a Buddhist sect which considered that everything is created by the mind, which was called Viññapti Matra, and they were also known as Yogacharas. They had very renowned scholars like Vasubandhu and so forth. So according to them, what does exist really is the consciousness, and whatever is known through the consciousness is sort of an illusion of the consciousness, like a mirage which is seen by the mind. But according to the Theravadians, it's very clear that they do advocate about the existence of certain realities. So we use the word reality. In Pali, we normally call it paramattha, paramattha, the natures that has a higher quality in existence. At the same time, there are synthetically produced objects in our mind. We call them panyati, or the concepts. This concept should not be mingled with the concept in normal Western philosophy, because according to it, anger is a concept. Sometimes it's an emotion. At the same time, sometimes some would say it's as a concept. So likewise, the concept in the Western philosophy is quite different from what we talk as in Theravada tradition. So according to Theravadians, looking into the ultimate natures, looking into the paramattha, by the way they exist together or how they exist in generations, according to their functions, we collectively take a certain object in our mind which is called panyati. So panyati is always looking into a group of realities, looking into a generation of realities. We consider there is one thing. That one thing does not exist in reality. For example, when lot of material stuff, the rupas existing together, we consider it as a one thing. For instance, now when the rupas are in a certain way arranged in the space, we consider this as a one table. According to the Theravada, there is no such a thing called a one table. It's a combination of the realities. So this idea of a one table is something which is created by the mind. That happens automatically. That's the next thing. It happens automatically. That is how the mind processes. But the fault is when it comes to the beings, like when it comes to the animate stuff, like the mind and matter together, working together, being unable to distinguish this mind and the matter element, we consider it as a one person. So this, based on this one person, knowing that there is someone who's living, knowing that he's continuing to live, he is doing actions, we get to attach to this idea of a person. That's a self attachment. Then we have a self view, the ignorance. So based on that, we tend to do good and bad deeds, and due to these facts, the generation of nama rupa happens to continue. So this is what normally the Theravada tradition advocates, and this continuation of nama and rupa is a suffering. So we have to cut off. Yes, so we have to cut off the causes for this. We have to cut off the causes for this continuation. So the craving or the karma and so forth, and then the nama rupa would not continue. So just to briefly look into what we have discussed so far, if you remember, we drew some a diagram, the mind and matter, which arise and passes away in the past life. Then it happens to continue. What continues is not a self. Then that is supposed to continue. So what I drew in broken lines is the realities that are supposed to happen, anupanna dhammas. Mind and matter, two processes are continuing. So normally draw this. So there are mind and matter that is supposed to happen. Then as long as the karma is not eradicated, as karma and defilements, we normally call avidya and tanha, ignorance and craving are not eradicated, supported by them, the karma energy, when it gets an opportunity, if you remember the opportunity, it produces the next life. So even at this moment, for example, for instance, if we consider this is our moment, living moment. So even at this moment, even though the karma has, the rebirth has not occurred yet, even though the rebirth has not occurred yet, we have to consider that we are supposed to be born. Why is that? There are causes for the rebirth. As long as the causes are prevailing, the effect that has not arisen yet has to be considered. We cannot completely dismiss its existence. It doesn't mean that the rebirth is already happened. It's not like something is hidden in some place. The possibility of a rebirth, we are not freed from that. So that possibility has to be considered something which is not non-existing. It is something that we are going to encounter. So in the Theravada tradition, in one sort of a way, we consider it as existing, not in the sense of ultimate reality as a possibility that could happen. So and in the past life also, there was avidya, ignorance, and tanha. I'm using the Pali words because it's easier, quite easier. So the craving. So because the craving was uneradicated, a certain karma got the opportunity and it gave the rebirth. So this is the normal process. So these are the non-arisen realities, if you remember, anupanna dhammas. Anupanna dhammas. Anupanna dhammas means the realities that have not arisen yet, but the causes are still prevailing. Causes are still prevailing. So these are the paramatta dhammas. Paramatta dhamma means the realities that are connected with arising. I think we clearly showed the distinction between the future paramatta dhammas and the anupanna realities. Anupanna realities are considered as a potency. So while they are being a potency, we call them anupanna dhamma. Future realities, anagata realities means while they are arising, considering that arising moment, we consider something as a future reality. So, and these are the past, these are the present, these are the something that can happen. So I think we clearly mentioned the distinction between future and anupanna. I'm not going to explain it in here at this moment. So this is the normal diagram how the samsara happens. So according to Theravadians, realities do exist. That is a very vital fundamental. Without that fundamental, the entire Theravada doctrine would collapse. The entire Theravada doctrine would collapse. But if you are following a different Buddhist tradition called Yogachara, the mind does exist and everything what we experience is a creation of the mind. And there was another school called Satya Siddhi. The Satya Siddhi. Satya Siddhi school advocated by Venerable Harivarman in India, ancient India. So their book was Satya Siddhi Shastram, which was highly recommended and used by the sect called Bahushrutiya, the learned ones, which was a different school from the Theravadians. So when you know their fundamentals, it seems like, I'm not guaranteeing on this point, it seems like they were advocating a doctrine that the outside world does exist, but we are unable to, know it as it is. So this outside world does exist, we are unable to know it as it is. But according to the Yogacharas, there is no existence of the outside world, only consciousness exists. But when you come to the Madhyamikas, the very, very famous Nagarjuna's doctrine, according to that, even the consciousness does not exist. Everything is an illusion. Theravadians are not completely out of this kind of a teaching. The same Buddha's teachings were interpreted in various ways. That's why the sects did happen. So Theravadians have the unique fundamentals. So their vipassana, their vidarsana, the insight is based on these fundamentals. If we get mixed up with the fundamentals of the Theravadians, and sometimes we tend to be Theravadians, we tend to follow the Theravada doctrine with some fundamentals of the Yogacharas. So that's why we normally hear, even among the Theravadians, that everything is an illusion, everything is a creation of the mind. So this is utterly against the Theravada. I'm not saying whether it's correct or wrong. It's not my duty to give an opinion whether what is correct or wrong. My purpose of this course is to explain what the Theravada tradition, what are its fundamentals. So later on, having studied it, the listeners can decide by themselves whether to accept or whether this is more logical or reliable, this tradition is. So otherwise, sometimes thinking that we are following Theravada, we are just following some other traditions unknowingly, that without we being aware of that. So that's why it's very vital to know the very basic fundamentals of Theravada in a clear-cut way. The reason is, the Madhyamikas also had their vipassana meditation. Yogacharas also had their vipassana meditation. According to the Madhyamikas, understanding that everything is an illusion. Because according to them, there are two types of emptiness. Emptiness of essence. So emptiness is explained by the Paticca Samutpada, according to them. Emptiness of essence explains that nothing exists. There's no intrinsic nature. So according to them, the path of vipassana is completely different from that of Theravadins. So understanding that everything is empty, I think is a very famous doctrine in the world at the moment. Please keep it in mind. This is not a Theravada teaching. It belongs to this Madhyamika group. If someone says everything is an illusion, if someone says everything is a creation of mind, it's a Yogachara teaching. So Madhyamika's accusation for the Theravada Yogacharas were, so Madhyamikas used to say everything doesn't exist, but the Yogacharas said the consciousness exists only. The consciousness only exists. So the accusation of the Madhyamikas to Yogacharas were, you all accepted the existence of a consciousness, one reality, other than the Nirvana. Nirvana do exist according to all the Buddhist sects, as far as I know. But other reality, the conditioned realities do not exist according to them. There are logical arguments on this. So as the Yogacharas accept the existence of consciousness, the Madhyamikas were accusing them, you are following a wrong path. But on the other hand, the Theravadians were advocating that all the conditioned realities exist momentarily, even at that moment. So their emptiness, the emptiness advocated by Theravadians are emptiness of a self, not the emptiness of an intrinsic nature. Intrinsic nature means hardness is something that is tangible. Tangible not in the sense of only in the body, tangible to the body, it's tangible to the mind, it can be known with the mind. Color is something tangible, it can be seen. When I say tangible, I am referring that it can be felt by the mind, it can be known by the mind. They are perceivable, they are predicable, they can be imagined, they can be known with inference, or they can be known with direct wisdom. But still, they have a very momentary existence other than the Nirvana, which is a permanent reality. So these conditioned realities do exist according to the Theravada. But when it comes to Sarvastivadians, they mention that even the realities, now according to Theravadians, realities exist only during that present moment. While before their arising they did not exist, after they perish, after they vanish, they do not come, they cannot be found in the existence. Only during that momentary, very short duration, we have to say that they exist. But according to Sarvastivadians, they brought a different doctrine, quite different from what the Theravadians. They said, yes, the realities do exist at the present moment, but still, even they exist in the past and the future. The realities which have passed away also do exist in a certain manner. Realities that have not arisen yet do exist in a certain manner. Coming into the present moment means a certain change of the manifestation. So that's what the Sarvastivadians. So then there was another school called Swarsha Kashyapiyas. They mention not all the past and future exists, only a part of past and future exists. Like the past karma that has been done, like the future results that is going to happen, the Upadino Dhammas and so forth. So they were advocating such a doctrine. Then you may be confused, like why even I myself mentioned about the existence of the past karma energy and the realities that are coming to happen. I was advocating about a potency, not a reality. But they were explaining what the realities do exist. As far as I've known. According to Theravada, different distinguishing. Theravada is talking about potencies, about the past and the future. Certain kind of a possibility we are talking about. So therefore, there are very clear, distinguished segregation of these sets. So that's why this course was initiated in the last semester to explain what Theravada is. The purpose is to explain clearly what is the practice of Theravada, what is the insight practice. Because when the fundamentals are different, our goal, the goal of enlightenment, completely diverge from each other. They start to eschew, like they start to make a huge gulf of gap between these practices. Now, according to the Madhyamikas, knowing that whatever is dependent origin dependent on something, like dependent origination, the realities that happen due to causes are empty, according to them. It's empty of a self. That's true. As for Theravadins also, it's true. Theravadins do agree on that. Then they mention if something got originated or something is conditioned by another reality, that second reality cannot be real. It should be a concept. So they said, for these reasons, a reality that didn't exist cannot come into existence. There are philosophical debates on this. So what happens is, what I want to emphasize is, now if we are following that doctrine, our vipassana practice would be to understand that these realities do not exist. That would be our aim. If a Madhyamika is practicing. If a Yogachara is practicing, they are going to understand everything is created by mind. Mind is the only reality. It arises and passes away, but everything other than that is an illusion. Knowing this is their understanding. But when it comes to the Theravadians, their practice would be, they accept that the realities do exist with direct knowledge. They have to understand it. And they should know these realities are momentary. These realities beget suffering, cause suffering. These realities are non-self. So this should be their understanding. It's not about emptiness. They would know that it's empty of a self, empty of a permanent essence, empty of an essence that brings pleasure. It's empty of something pleasurable. These realities are a bunch of suffering. That is their understanding. So now I think it's clear that the practice would greatly differ from each other if the fundamentals are different. So it's very vital, if we want to practice the Theravada Vipassana, that we have to understand the Theravada fundamentals very clearly. Otherwise, I'm not saying that Theravada is correct or other traditions are wrong. So the disaster would be, which is very pity, thinking that we are following a Theravada doctrine, some would be following another sort of a practice. So it's okay, it's the right of a person to follow whatever doctrine he or she likes, but we have to be very clear to know on which path we are. So that is the purpose of this lectures. So we explained about the ultimacy in 29 lectures in the last semester. So now we are moving to another new chapter, as we discussed. We call it the Rupa, the matter. Corporeality. sometimes corpore comes from the corpse, the dead bodies, the body's corpse. Something is related to the body. So it's also something used, corporeality or matter or rupa. So what is rupa according to the Theravadians? What is rupa? So now we have to, we should go back into we should recall our memories about the ultimate reality. So according to the Theravadians, the reality means, what is a reality? Reality is something which possesses an intrinsic nature, a unique intrinsic nature. Pathavi is a reality. It has the intrinsic nature of hardness. Consciousness is a reality. It has the nature of focusing at an object. Lobha is a reality. It has the nature of attaching to an object. So realities do possess intrinsic. They have inbuilt qualities. And also we mentioned, a reality is not a thing that possesses the quality. The quality itself is the reality. Mentioning that a reality possesses a quality is just for the convenience of, just for the purpose of just for the purpose of conveying the idea easily. It's just for easy conveying. So normally, even though we mention realities do possess intrinsic natures, it doesn't mean, for example, when we say the color of the flower has a color. Flower has a color. So if you think about it deeply, flower and color cannot be the same. Color is an attribute of the flower. Flower is a thing and color is something that the flower possesses. But according to the Theravada, when we say Pathavi has hardness as its intrinsic nature. So even this statement would say that this Pathavi, implicitly say Pathavi is not equal to hardness. But this is not what the Theravadians want to express. This is just for because otherwise it's quite difficult to explain. Pathavi itself is hardness. It's difficult to discuss about the matter. So therefore, according to Theravadians, even though we mention such a sentence grammatically, according to Theravadians, Pathavi is identical with three equalities with hardness. 100% equal. So therefore, realities are just natures. Realities are intrinsic natures of what? They themselves. There's no dictum here. There's no duality of the reality and the quality. The reality and the quality are the same, according to Theravadians. And also we mentioned, when we come to Paramatta Dhammas, we divided, if you remember, there's also quite important because maybe there are some new listeners. We divided Paramatta and we divided two groups, Sankata and Asankata. Asankata Paramatta. Kata. Sorry. Oops. Right. So here we had four types. Paramatta Dhamma. Then we had Upadino Dhamma. Then we had Paramatta Jatika. Then we had Anupanna Dhamma. Right? So Nirvana falls here. We were talking about fivefold Nirvana according to some Theravadians. Nirvana. So this was unconditioned. So when I'm talking about Paramatta Dhammas, I'm talking about conditioned realities. So these conditioned realities do have an intrinsic nature. At the same time, they are related with arising. The conditioned paramattas are related with arising. Either they have arisen and passed away, they have arisen but not passed away yet, or they have not arisen yet. I'm not talking about the potency, talking about the reality. So a paramatta dhamma is related with arising. Don't mix up with nirvana, because according to this distinction, nirvana is separated from the conditioned realities. It's not considered as a paramatta dhamma, it's considered as an unconditioned reality. You can call it a paramatta. So paramatta dhammas, I'm talking about the conditioned realities, they do possess intrinsic natures and they are related with arising. That was the main explanation, that was the main explanation about the paramattas. So we also mentioned paramattas are twofold, nama and rupa, remember. So now we are going to start about this topic, the rupa. The rupa. So rupas are intrinsic natures, they are paramattas. They are paramattas. So intrinsic natures means they do not possess any, they are not things. They are a quality but they are not things. They don't have a shape. Each and every individual rupa doesn't have a shape. They are just mere qualities. If you go into the handout that I distributed yesterday, it was quite late to distribute. Anyway, so 1.1, the most obvious and conspicuous realities among the paramatta dhammas are called rupa, corporeality. So then, these realities are just intrinsic natures, like hardness, it's not a hard thing, hardness, cohesion, heat, pushing and blotting nature, color, sound, and so forth. Notwithstanding the fact that these realities are mere characteristics, in other words, qualities, while existing together, they manifest material attributes of physical substances. That is quite important. This is something that can be challenged greatly. Something that can be challenged greatly. Now what we are going to say, all the realities according to Theravada Tradition are not substances, they are not things, they are just mere qualities. But regarding the rupa, not about the nama, when it comes to rupas, these qualities, when they come together, they manifest certain physical attributes of substances. I'll repeat again. When these qualities, which are called rupa, come together, when they coexist, they happen to manifest certain physical attributes, like substantial qualities, extended qualities. We know the extension, right? Rupa is extended. Extension means it consumes space. It has a shape. Immaterial stuff are not extending. They are not extended. Extended means they occupy a certain space. It's always three-dimensional. For example, if we talk about a triangle, we're talking about a triangle, there is nothing two-dimensional, right? Because even we draw a triangle, there's a tiny sort of we call it like tiny thickness, even if you draw it on a paper or on a board. So there are always, when it comes to the rupa, we have the three dimensions, the height, length, and the depth. We call it, right? Right, length, width, and the depth or the height. We have the three dimensions. So when it comes to the three-dimensional, it always occupies a space. So originally the rupa, originally means in terms of realities, each and every rupa doesn't have a shape, doesn't have a space, doesn't consume a space, they are not things. But when they come together, they manifest certain physical attributes. It means they happen to exist in a manner that they are seen or they are known as stuff or things, substances. But according, when we go into deep, now we'll be discussing this in another 2 lectures about the tiniest matter particle, the Rupa Kalapas. How do we understand these immaterial things, immaterial natures would bring about a substance called Rupa Kalapa. It's not that the Rupas are creating substance, they exist in a manner as they manifest as substances. That is how it's better said in Theravada tradition. But normally we would say these Rupa are made of natures, qualities. These stuff are made of natures like Patavi and Apo and so forth. So now that was one of the most important explanations about Rupa. But Namas, the consciousness and the mental factors or either mental states, they also exist together according to Theravadians. There's always clusters, either mental clusters, physical clusters. But mental clusters, how much they come together, they never exhibit physical attributes. Even all the consciousness in the world are gathered at one place, even still we cannot even create the tiniest matter, tiniest particle. That is their nature. It's something called immaterial. Immaterial means it doesn't have a substantial quality. Even these immaterial stuff come together, they do not possess substantial quality. But Nama and Rupa both are intrinsic natures. They are natures. But the difference is both of them doesn't have any shape. Individually they don't have shapes. Individually they are not substances. But the difference is when the qualities which are called Rupa, they come together, they manifest substantial qualities, material attributes. But the qualities which are called Nama, how much they come together, they do not exhibit or manifest or show up any of the material qualities. So that is what the main distinct about this Nama and Rupa. Both of them are intrinsic. So when we come to the Paramatta nature, they are natures, they are qualities. But the thing is, the difference between Nama and Rupa, Rupa qualities come together, they get manifest as things, but the Nama qualities, they do not get manifested as things. So then now someone can ask a very, very logical question. Now if the Rupa in his original form, in his original nature doesn't have a shape, doesn't consume any space, how could it be possible that the things that doesn't have a shape come together and manifest as things? And how could they be extended? It's a very, very logical question, which I think which is difficult to be answered by in whatever perspective, Theravada, whatever. There are certain things that we are unable to explain. That's how I would put this question. I'm not answering it. That's how I would consider about this question, how to digest this idea. Because when René Descartes brought the idea of dualism in the Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy already had that idea of mind and matter. But when it comes to Western philosophy, the one who brought the idea of a duality, in the Greek philosophy, they had the idea of self and soul and all. But during the period of enlightenment in Europe, René Descartes brought the idea that other than the physical stuff, when the Hippocrates said that the mental emotions, who is responsible for these emotions is the brain. The Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, brought this idea. It was later developed into great levels. He brought this seed of this idea. But when it comes to René Descartes, he mentioned that there should be some sort of an immaterial thing other than the matter, other than the body. So he called it the soul or the self. So when this idea was expressed, the greatest challenge to this idea was brought by the Princess Elizabeth, later who became the Queen of England, was known as the Virgin Queen, who even fought successfully with the Spain. Not this Elizabeth II, who is now at power, Elizabeth I. As a princess, she brought a very logical argument, which is considered as some would say it's a punch to this dualism. So her argument was, if the mind or the consciousness what you say is an immaterial thing. How could an immaterial thing causes the happening or the movements of a material thing? If it is the material has to be, when we want to have movement in the materials, it has to be a material force should be there. How could an immaterial thing, which is called the soul or the consciousness, could cause this to happen? It's something which is difficult to explain. Another, according to Theravadians, we would say the mind has this defect. We have to accept that mind has this defect to move the body. How could this defect is overcome? It's by producing chittaja rupa, mind-born matter. Mind-born matter is the bridge between the material stuff and the consciousness. By creating a mind-born matter, it can move this body. So still the question comes, how consciousness would produce something which is material, called mind-born matter? Still the question would be there. Still the problem would be there. We can still get some idea about to logicalize this, about the virtual reality that happens according to the physical science, because according to them, there are, other than the main electron protons and the quarks or the neutrinos that exist in the world, which originate from the Big Bang according to them, other than that, there are always virtual realities happening, arising and passing away out of nothing, that has been verified with experiment. So likewise, so this doesn't have any explanation how this happen, but they do experience these things happen. So according to Theravadians, because of consciousness, a certain matter happens. With the help of that matter, the material body is being moved. This is something that we can observe only. It's very difficult to show the logical relationship, immaterial, how it produces matter. So as the Queen, the Princess Elizabeth, asked this question, how an immaterial thing could move up the material thing. So likewise, and another thing that which is difficult to be explained with logic is the eradication of defilements. We would normally say when the wisdom arises, the ignorance would get eradicated. What is the logic behind this? Why would someone say so? We would bring examples. When the light comes, the darkness dispels. When the coldness is given, the heat would reduce. Scientifically, it's different thing. Normally, conventionally, we would say. So when the medicine is given, the virus is destroyed. So these are the examples that we give normally. But could it explain the phenomenon of eradication completely? No. They are metaphors. So how could the Buddha explain this? He mentioned in one sutra, I forgot the name of the sutra, he said, if you arouse good qualities, unwholesome qualities would be dispelled. If it cannot be done, I would not instruct you to eradicate the unwholesomeness. It can be eradicated. So what is the logic behind it? The direct observation. If you develop loving kindness, you can know it with direct experience, your anger would reduce. The times that we get angry would reduce, the intensity of the anger would reduce. So in the end, when it comes to Buddhism, when we are thinking about a logical explanation, in the end we end up with the observation. That's why Buddhism is said to be a something that has to be directly experienced. Not only nirvana, eradication, the nama and rupa, they have to be directly experienced in the end. So when we are experiencing directly, you don't need a logical explanation. The sub-commentators say, the Anutika once mentioned, when something can be known with direct experience, you do not need any logic for that. Pachakka siddhe yutti maggana nati. There is no use of searching of a logical explanation when something can be known directly. Therefore, in the same way, according to Theravadians, now how do we understand these material things are just qualities? I would come to that not in the next lecture, tomorrow's lecture, next week. I'll be discussing about the Rupa Kalapa in two ways, from inside to out and from outside to inside. So according to them, Theravadians, immaterial things are just mere, matter is mere quality. but when they come together, they manifest certain physical attributes. 1.2, a corporeal characteristic is called Rupa. The characteristic, corporeal characteristic. What is a corporeal characteristic? Corporeal here means an adjective here. A characteristic which when they come together, a characteristic or intrinsic nature. When I say the characteristic and the intrinsic nature, I am referring to the same thing. So when these corporeal natures means natures that would manifest physical attributes when come together. So a corporeal nature or a characteristic is called Rupa. So Rupa is just a nature. Rupa is just a nature. Rupa means natures, corporeal. Right? Corporeal natures. And the appearance of a cluster of Rupa as extant substance is called Rupa Kalapa. Extant means, so when we are studying Theravada tradition, there's another question, there's another problem, that barrier that we have to overcome. It's not normal English. The philosophical terms have to be used. So that's why when we study the philosophy, even the Western philosophy, there are lots of words that are very difficult to be grasped. So we are not using the day-to-day language when we convey the ideas, very deep ideas. That's why even the Buddha, he had to use a lot of technical terms like Vijnana, Saddha or Vedana, and they were not that much common to the humans at that time, as far as I know. So the appearance of a cluster of Rupas, the cluster of Rupas as an extant substance. So cluster of Rupas is called, sorry, it has to be other way around. It has to be, beg your pardon. That is a corporeal nature. Is Rupa. Now we have to bring Rupa here. A cluster of Rupas, plural form, are called Rupa Kalapa. Cluster. These terms are very, very important. We have to keep them in mind. I think some of you have already studied them, because the entire lecture series would be based on these terminologies. Then, such a generation, Rupa Kalapas exist in generations. These clusters, they do arise and pass away. They keep on happening in generations. It's not a one Rupa Kalapa existing from childhood to today. It's obvious, right? So, but scientifically we have a different explanation on this. But when we think with our practical experience, we know Rupa does change according to Theravadians. Rupa Kalapas arise and passes away. They keep on happening in generation. Generation of Rupa Kalapas. Of Rupa Kalapas are called Rupa Santati. These are very vital. Rupa, Rupa Kalapa, Rupa Santati. Rupa Kalapa, Rupa Santati. There are 18 types of Rupa according to Theravada tradition. 18. Some would get confused. What is the 28? The remaining 10 are not considered real Rupa according to Theravadians. They are something related to the Rupas. Then, in terms of Rupa Kalapas, we have 23. The combination, 23 combinations of Rupa. Then, combinations, there are 23 types of combinations. So these Rupa Kalapas, they exist in generations. So we normally have 24 types of Rupa Santatis. This number can change according to how you consider about them. So I'll be discussing about them in detail in future lectures. Following are the 18 types of Rupas mentioned in the Abhidhamma literature of the Theravadians. So it's these Rupa, 18 Rupa is mainly divided into two groups, 4 and 14. 4 are the 4 great elements, which we will explain later: the hardness, cohesion, or the liquidity, and the heat and the coldness, and the pushing or blotting nature. Then we have derived matter. Derived matter means which depend on the 4 great, but they are different from 4 great elements, like the sensitivity, the color, the sound, the smell, taste, and sensitivity to the color, sensitivity to the sound, and so forth. For the size and sensitivity to the color, sensitivity to the sound, sensitivity to the nose, smell, sensitivity to the taste, sensitivity to the tangible physical objects, the touch, and so forth. Then we have the femininity. According to Theravadians, scientifically it's a chromosome, X and Y, whatever the combination. But according to Theravadians, it's a Buddhist tradition, it's a Bhava Rupa we call. Pumbhava is a masculinity, the distinguish between a male and a female, which is also recognized in modern science. This distinguishes, but there are certain intermediate states as well. Then Hade Rupa, the base for the consciousness, heart base, where the consciousness happens. Then Jivitindriya, the life faculty, which is debated or which is dispelled, I would call, in scientifically at the moment in today's generation, because there was something called vitality. There was some sort of extra energy needed for these cells to continue. But today's science, they don't accept this. They don't accept this idea. But in Eastern philosophy, we have an idea called vitality. According to Theravadians, this is the effect of karma upon our rupa, I would call. How the karma causes this rupa to function properly, to exist, to live, is vitality. We'll be discussing them in detail in the lectures, coming lectures. Oja rupa, the nutriment. So there is now, nutriment means a sort of a quality in the rupa, after having consumed, they produce certain energies, right? So and also there are, then we come to 1.5, I would conclude the lecture with this. There are 4 major causes which produce matter, karma, the past karma, chitta, the consciousness, and the mental factors, utu, the element of heat and coldness, and the nutriment. So there are 4 great causes of rupa. So all the 18 rupas that we discussed so far are direct productions of these 4 causes. But there are another 10 rupas, we can call them qualities related to rupa, but we have to have long discussions on them. We shall have. Then so they are called anipanna rupa. They are not concretely produced matter. So one is when the 2 rupa kalapas, the clusters of rupas happen, there is a space. Already the space existed. There is a space in between when rupa kalapas come together. Rarely they happen having got attached to each other. So there is a space in between. So that space is called akasa dhatu or paricheda rupa. And there is another explanation for that. The kaya vinyati. So when we make the bodily movements, there is an effect of the mind in the body. Why does the body behaves according to the mind? It's not controlled by the mind. So this sort of a change happens in a certain matter in the body based on the rupa. I'll be discussing them in detail. It's called kaya vinyati. So try to memorize these terms. It would be very useful. Like when you want to study chemistry, you have to memorize the periodical table. Otherwise, it's impossible to study chemistry, because that's how the qualities of the elements are arranged. So likewise, if you want to study the Theravada tradition, there are certain things that you have to memorize. So therefore, we better to memorize them. Vachi vinyati, the effect of the mind on our speech. When we talk, when I want to say today, I don't utter yesterday, right? When I want to say go, if the word comes as come, it's a huge problem in our communication. So the words, the sounds are modified according to our intentions. Our bodily behavior, if we want to lift our hand, when we want to lift the hand, if the hand goes down, or when we want to stand up, if our body lies down, like a system error in the system. Like sometimes when in a computer, when you press something else happens. If such thing happens, this entire existence would come into a chaos. So all these movements and speeches happen according to the mind. Therefore, the intention So there is a effect of this intention on the rupa. Then rupasa lahuta, rupasa mudita, kamanyata means the lightness, softness and the readability or wieldiness, not wildiness, wieldiness of the body for certain movements. So it is certain secondary attributes of the four great elements. Upachaya santati jarata anicchata is the arising of rupa, decaying of the rupa and passing away of the rupa. There are two types of arising: initial arising in a generation and the continuous subsequent arising of rupa kalapas in generations. So these 10, they are also discussed as matter in Dhamma Sangani, so we have to talk about them, but in terms of reality they are not ultimate realities. So that would be the lecture today. So we discussed about the fundamentals of Theravada. If we sum up what we have discussed so far today, we talk about the sansaric explanation because it was a lecture we started after a few months to recall our memory. This is the explanation of sansara according to Theravadians, and the rupa, matter. So the reality is and its nature are identical. So rupas are qualities that do have intrinsic natures. And next week, tomorrow we'll be discussing that they cannot be reduced any further. Then rupa are corporeal reality. The nature of a rupa is that when they come, even though they don't have shapes, they are just natures. When they come together, they manifest material attributes. Then also reminded about the Paramatta explanation and what are the rupas according to Theravada Tradition. Briefly, there are 18 types of rupas. The four great elements: hardness, cohesion, heat, and the bloating nature. And then there are derived matter, 14, the sensitivities, the 5 sensitivities: color, taste, sound and smell, and also the masculinity, femininity, heart base, nutriment and the life faculty. Then the clusters of rupas, there are 23 types of clusters which we'll be discussing in future lectures. Then generation of rupas. Then also some 10 matters that are not considered concretely produce rupas. Yeah. So these will be these were the lectures. So this was the lecture. So this knowledge is quite important for us to understand what rupa is. Only when we distinguish rupa and nama from each other, we'll be able to separate them, because the thing is, our nature of the mind is unable to distinguish things when things are together. So when the four great elements exist together in the space, we consider as a one thing. So when the mind and matter exist together, connected with each other, having a great relationship with each other, when the body is behaving according to the intentions of the mind, it's very difficult to distinguish these two. So we tend to think this one person who's doing the action. That is the greatest problem that humans have in terms of liberation. We consider this as a one entity, one self. So what happens when the self idea comes? We automatically gets attached to it. We want to make it happier. We want to develop a good career. We want to go into a discrete. I is there. So what Buddha want to say is, no, there is no I called a single thing. Like there's no table other than the material stuff. Look into yourself. There are two dualism, that is two elements are existing, mind and matter. So it's so hard to distinguish. They are interrelated with each other. So to distinguish them, we have to have a proper knowledge on them. Then only we'll be able to focus on them separately and see, even though we are not unable to physically distinguish them, we have to intellectually or mentally distinguish only. But still, even in Arahant, they exist together. Even in the Buddha, mind and matter happen together. So that's why it's quite it's a daunting task. That's why it has been so daunting task to get out of this samsara. For that, we have to study thoroughly on the rupa and nama separately, and then we try to focus with an attentive mind. We'll be able to distinguish nama and rupa separately and get rid of, subdue the self-view, and then we can proceed further in the vipassana practice. So this knowledge is very important. The discussions of the rupa, try to follow it and try to get the clear understanding about what Theravada says, so you can follow the practice according to the Theravada tradition if you wish. So this would be the lecture, and I open the forum for questions.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. Hello everyone. So as just for sure, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, or you can put the question in the thoughts. And there is one question that so the question is Rupa the four elements? And then what is Patavi?
I beg your pardon, Dr. Ryan, the voice was not clear.
Yes, can you hear me now, Dr.?
Yes, now we can hear you, yeah.
Yes, so the question is Rupa the four elements? And then what is Patavi?
What is Patavi? Is Rupa the four elements? You mean Rupa is the Rupa four elements? That was the question, right?
Yes.
And what is Patavi?
Yes.
Yeah, so when you say Rupa four elements, I think I have given it in the handout. These are hardness, cohesion. We also need to include fluidity here, heat or coldness. Then we have pushing nature or bloating nature. These are the four great elements. So when we say Rupa, these four qualities, hardness is a quality, cohesion is a quality, heat and coldness is a quality, bloating nature is a quality. But if we look into the scientific perspective, we may have a different explanation on this. Now I am talking about the Theravada philosophy. So according to Theravadians, these are the four great qualities. They are Rupa. But it doesn't mean that they are the only Rupa. So when they come together, a certain kind of quality appears that is sensitive to the eye. Sometimes when they clash together, there appears a certain quality which is sensitive to the ear. We call it sound. The quality sensitive to the eye, we call it color. The quality sensitive to the nose, we call it the smell. So likewise, there are 18 types of Rupa. 18 types of Rupa. So out of them, 4 are, these are the main 4 qualities of material thing. Patavi means hardness. Patavi is hardness. So therefore, when we say Patavi is a part of the group of Rupa, and it's also the, so when we say Rupa, we have to divide it into groups, 4 great elements and the derived element 4. Patavi is here. Patavi, Apo, Tejo and Vayu. So then there are the other 14 that we talk about, the sensitivities and so forth. So Patavi is here, the hardness, it's a part of the Rupa. Yeah, that's how I explain as I understood the question.
Your introduction, in the introduction you said about the philosophical fundamentals of different sects. So I don't remember the name of the sects right now, but that you said that in one of the sects, they advocate that there is nothing at all, everything is just illusion. And for another sect, and they said that the mind is there, but everything else is just illusion of the mind. And then for a Theravada tradition, then okay, we consider there is mind and matter. So my question is, and also you said that the different philosophical fundamentals will affect the way they practice vipassana meditation as well, because they have different goal or goal of enlightenment. So my question is, if they have different ways of practicing and their description of enlightenments are different, then there must be one of them which is correct, and the rest should be just illusions then. Right?
Yeah.
And then, so if we say that, okay, so we are following Theravada tradition and we believe that our way of practice is correct and our definition of enlightenment is correct, then that means all of the rest of the sects, their state of enlightenment, their declared state of enlightenment should be all illusions then.
Correct. Yes. So that's why I said it's relative. So if we, as you said, Dr. Ryan, if we strictly understand the Theravada and the practice, and if we think it's correct, and if we get to understand it's correct, automatically the other understandings have to be wrong. That's for sure. Then the same thing would be said by Yogacharas. If they understand and if they feel it's correct, then our would be wrong. So objectively looking, there have to be one truth. Some would say there are various ways for the enlightenment. You finally reach it, but no. Please keep in mind, these difference of these fundamentals would never lead to the same destination. Idea of omniscient God, creating God, the omnipotent God. Almighty is omnipotency. So omnipotent God, creation of omnipotent God, a doctrine of a divine creation, doctrine of dependent origination can never lead to the same destination. It may bring good qualities, it can still bring the harmony in the world, that is something else, but in terms of philosophical enlightenment or enlightenment, they can never come to the same destination, as you said. So likewise, Madhyamikas, Yogacharas and Theravada. In the Theravadians, we have various ways to reach the goal, the Nirvana. So that's why we normally say Nirvana is like a sea, you can get into it in various ways, various moods. But the idea of Yogacharas is not, it cannot be equalized to that metaphor because they are having different fundamentals, as you said. So you have to understand something, only the mind exists, other things are illusion. Everything is an illusion. So therefore, they are completely different, and so that's why they couldn't exist together. They couldn't exist together. So the thing is, in my personally, when I deliver the lectures, it's not my, I consider it as something that is self-imposed sort of a responsibility, I would call. Many would disagree with me. This is my idea. As a lecturer, as a preacher, it's my duty to say what the Theravada says. I'm not in the position to enforce or explain or advocate or confirm that this Theravada is correct and others are wrong. It's my personal belief, personal practice is something else. So what I'm doing is, I'm explaining the Theravada fundamentals detailedly. So it's up to the listener. So if they want, they can follow these as well, and then they can judge. If someone thinks, okay, Theravada is correct and it's very more logical, you don't need to study others, and you can get enlightened from that. So I lead the final understanding of the lecture to the listener. But as you said, Dr. Ryan, if some tradition brings a proper enlightenment, others has to be wrong. If it is Theravada, then Theravada is correct, others are wrong. Then the same way, an advocate of Yogacara would say the same thing, that his understanding is correct, others are wrong. So some would feel like I'm just leaving it open. Yes, I consider it as the thing for my purpose is to give the objectivity so people can choose by themselves.
My question is, since you said the Rupa has no shape, so the cluster of Rupa also has no shape, and the generation Rupa also has no shape, correct?
No,
also,
I just want to correct the question. I mentioned the Rupa individually doesn't have a shape, but when they are in cluster, they do show a shape. They do consume space.
So the cluster has shape and the generation Rupa also has a shape.
Shape means it's a generation, means the generation Rupa Kalapas. Yeah, you can call it as a shape. Yeah, but generation itself is something doesn't exist. It's a generation of Kalapas. You can call it as a shape. Yeah, no problem.
So since the Rupa has no shape, how the cluster of Rupa has a shape?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, go ahead.
Because there's some distance between the Rupas, maybe some air between them, so there's a shape.
Yeah, that's why. That's why I mentioned in the lecture. This is something very difficult to explain. I knew that question would come. That's why I myself put the question from the beginning. This is something that I'm unable to explain. How something that doesn't have a shape, coming into groups, coming together, would manifest a shape. So I would put it like that. That is their nature. The nature of that quality is, that would be a definition of the Rupa. A nature which is called Rupa, when they come together, they manifest a shape. So that is, when we say it's their quality, It's not an answer for your question. We are defining Rupa arbitrarily, that according to our wish, we would say we are imposing a certain, some would call it stubbornly imposing, according to our desire, that I'm saying that Rupa means a quality which would manifest, which doesn't have a shape, but would manifest shape when come together. So based on that definition, it cannot be explained, as you said. So it's something that can only be observed according to Theravadians. So so that's why I said the same question. When it comes to the mind and matter, based on mind, according to the mind, the body behaves. That's why the Prince Lisi asked the question, Princess Elizabeth, how could an immaterial thing causes a movement in the material world? It's also something that is very difficult to answer. The same way, how could something that doesn't have a shape, another logical answer, now for example, a person cannot see, a blind person. How could even 100 blind people come together, they still cannot have a sight? For example, a blind person cannot see, even 100 blind people come together, still they cannot see anything. Right? So we normally also say Rupa is unable to move by itself. Why? It doesn't have intention. Nama is unable to move because it doesn't have a matter, it doesn't have a physicality. So both are unable to move. How could two people cannot move come together and then make a movement? Similar question. The commentators asked counter argument, isn't it like one blind person cannot see, even two come together, they still cannot see? Yes, because they have the same defect. But Nama and Rupa story, Nama cannot move because it doesn't have a material attribute. Rupa cannot move because it doesn't have intention, but Nama has the intention, Rupa has the material attribute. So when they come together in a combination, as a group, collectively, they can move. It's like a person, a creeper who cannot move, and a blind person. Blind person can move, he cannot see the world. He cannot see the road. A person who had cripple, who cannot move, whatever it is. So he cannot move because he doesn't have the legs, but he has the eyes. So when the blind person keeps that disabled man on his shoulders, he would say, move to this side, move to that side. The blind man could move with his physicality. So therefore, as you said, if this is still, it's not an answer, it's still coming very close to logical explanation. Nama cannot move, Rupa cannot move, but when they come together, both of them can move. Why is that? What was the inability of Rupa to move? That was not having any intention. What was the inability of the mind to move? It didn't have physicality, physical attributes. But the Rupa doesn't have the intention, Nama has the intention. Nama doesn't have physicality, Rupa has the physicality. Then they come together, the requirement is fulfilled. So if I put this into the Rupa, if two hardness come together, qualities of two hardness, for example, if it's very difficult to delimit what is a one hardness and two hardness. For instance, if we limit them now, okay, this is a cluster of hardness, these two hardness, when they come together, just hardness, I would say they would never manifest a physical attribute. They can never manifest physical attributes because still it's hardness. Hardness doesn't have such a quality. But what happens? Hardness is just a mere quality. That hardness, it could scatter in the sky or it's not space at any place. So this hardness is kept in one place by something called cohesion to one location, one point. But still it's not stable. So what happens? So this cohesion is an inward force, but at the same time there's an outward force. So therefore, when the Vayu comes, Apo holds it, when Vayu comes, it starts to blot. But if there is no Apo, it would get blasted. It cannot be stable. So because of Apo and Vayu coming together, Patavi happens to exist in a certain space. So why this hardness happens to exist in a certain space? Because it has an inward force. Because of this inward force, it doesn't go everywhere. Because of the Vayu, which is a outward force, it doesn't fall inside. Like for example, with the gravitational force, sun would with a strong gravitational force, a star would collapse inside. But because of the pressure it creates due to chemical reactions, it could stand this gravitational force. So likewise, because we know great objects have a gravitational center, it would collapse into that place. Similarly, this hardness would completely collapse in this position if only Apo exists. Because of Vayu, it pushes outside. So what happens? The hardness tend to exist in a certain space. So that is the reason, what I think, why these physical stuff could get Rupa, which doesn't have a shape, could end up in having a shape in the cluster. So therefore, because hardness have a different quality, cohesion has a different quality, bloating nature has a different quality, he's a different quality. Each of them doesn't have a shape. But since their qualities are different, like the Nama and Rupa, both cannot move, but they have different abilities. So likewise, hardness itself, the cohesion itself, the bloating nature itself doesn't have that shape, material shape. But since their abilities, the forces, the natures are different, when they come together, they fulfill the requirement for a shape. They fulfill the requirement for a substance. So that is why they would manifest. This is how I would explain. I'm not sure whether it's answering the question. I'm just trying to be more logical and trying to get deeper and to make it more tangible.
Thank you, Manik. Can I ask, according to the definition, how many rupa have a shape, like 2 or 3 or 4?
No. What I'm saying is none of the rupas have a shape. Whenever they come together, this cluster has a shape. It's not that the rupa has a shape. The cluster has the shape.
Yeah, I mean, they come together, they have a shape.
Yeah.
But did they say how many come together have a shape? Like
At least 4.
Or 3?
That's a good question. 4, at least 4. 4 great elements. This is the basic requirement. When the 4 great elements come together, they can have a shape. Color, taste, smell, and nutriment are additional attributes. They are not contributing to this shape. They are just secondary attributes when they come together.
Thank you.
Actually, I got a little confused also. Now, one thing. Okay, first of all, the other theories. So we have no idea about other theories, like Yogachari and stuff. And so, I mean, I think no, we don't want to follow Theravada if we don't feel that Theravada takes us to Nibbana. So, I mean, so we are kind of a little, I don't know, I mean, I'm a little confused now. And also you said that you don't kind of follow this also, right? Is that something you mentioned, something like that?
No, I mentioned I'm not the advocator that this is correct or wrong. My practice is personal. I just keep it to myself. I would prefer to keep it to myself.
So does it mean that you are not kind
I'm
of?
a Theravada monk. I'm a Theravada monk, obviously. Yeah.
So
I do practice Theravada. It's obviously, otherwise it's not proper to say. I do practice Theravada, but what is my internal preference or personal practice? Let me keep it to myself.
Okay. Actually, we had this conversation in some days back also. Is there any literature, any you have a kind of a handout that explains these other theories like
I think Mr. Ananda, I gave 10 lectures on this in Sinhalese from lecture number 106 to 116, 105 to 115 I think. So there are
106 to 115.
Sinhala. Sorry for the other non-Sinhalese speakers. So this is the lecture series. I was mainly focusing on the Rupa, but I did explain about their teachings, all the 18 sects during the Asoka's reign. But I didn't go into Yogachara or Madhyamika or some other schools, but I explained about the 18 sects in detail.
Okay, so I can refer that.
Yes, exactly.
So basically the Theravada tradition, is it right if we say that it started from Venerable Buddhism during Asoka's time, or before that?
So this is another topic which we need to go into the history. I have explained about this in those lectures as well. There are opinions on this, I would call. I would rather explain it traditionally. We would say it came directly from the Buddha. No other discussion on that. This is the pure form. That is how we traditionally explain this. Some would say Theravada is a development, and it was coined as Theravada. It was Theravada. The word Theravada existed before the Third Council, but the shape of the Theravada that we have today was done by Moggaliputta Tissa, according to some scholars. This is not my opinion. I was according to some scholars. Then some would say the Theravada was further shaped in Sri Lanka by the Maggaviharians. There's another opinion. So what are the counter arguments they bring? The Theravadians have a doctrine of momentariness, because when you go into the Theravada momentariness, you cannot find this sort of a very fast existence of momentariness in the Tipitaka. Obviously, you cannot find this much of a speed, like it arises and passes away. It is mentioned clearly in the Tipitaka, but not in this level. Venerable Nagasena would say, at a moment of a snap, this much of chittas would arise as it is the paddy seeds in this area, this much area, a huge area of a paddy field. So this sort of, so then according to them, Nagasena, Venerable Nagasena is also a contributor to shape the Theravada in this manner. But when you look into the Milinda Panya, there are certain teachings that are very difficult to explain by the Theravada perspective regarding the Kamma that resulted the Buddha. It's a very, very controversial discussion. So some would say the Milinda Panya, according to what I understand, some elements are very difficult. So some would say, I'm not saying, some would say that Milinda Panya had some non-Theravadical aspects. So it's very difficult to, because even within the Theravada tradition, now when you go into the Theravada tradition, about the existence of the Chitta, the phases of Chitta, the contribution of how the root causes, what are the qualities of the root causes, what are the causes of the Kusala and Akusala. Some would say it's based on root causes. The Buddhaghosa, whenever Buddhaghosa rejects it, refutes it very absolutely or very strongly, he refutes this. But there were some scholars who embraced this idea. So therefore, within the Theravada also there are certain arguments. But when it comes to the distinguish between the Yogacharas, Madhyamikans and Theravadians, Sarvastivadins, and also Sammityas. So we have a very clear distinct that the two traditions can never exist together. But when within the Theravada, when they explain that Chitta has 3 phases, and another book says, the Mula Tika said it should have 2 phases, and Lady Sayadaw prefers that idea is better referring to the Kathavattu. So, but still, all of them could coexist within this tradition because it doesn't affect the Vipassana practice. Doesn't affect the Vipassana practice. But the Madhyamika ideology, the philosophy comes in, it completely changes the Vipassana practice. So as you said, now when did the Theravada emerge? According to the tradition, nothing to say, it came from the Buddha himself. But according to some scholars, it was Moggaliputta Tissa made a great contribution. So for example, if you read the books by David Kalupahana, a renowned scholar of Sri Lanka who taught Buddhism for a long period, a late scholar, very renowned scholar in the Hawaiian University. He says this entire confusion, according to him, but I'm saying what he said, otherwise some would think that I'm saying this. What he says, this entire confusion of the Theravada was created by Moggaliputta Tissa. So according to him, he was a distorter, or he was completely lost in the Buddha's teachings. So there are opinions of the scholars what the Theravada is. Traditionally, this came from the Buddha, and some moderates, moderate means some who are more biased to the Theravada and would say it got gradually developed with the Buddha, and some would say the entire thing was turned to a due direction, and Moggaliputta Tissa Thera made the completely shaped this in the third council, and some would say it was shaped by the Sri Lankan Mahatheras in the Maggavihari. So these are the opinions that we have about Theravada. So yeah, that's what I can give. So there, what happens is there is no way to. I don't think there is much possibility of confirming about this historical fact. So personally, what I do is
Buddha has mentioned about Buddhism, right? Like, it's there. I mean, basically, we are talking about, Nama Rupa and, this Abhidharma.
Yeah.
Basic. So, but Buddha has, definitely has mentioned about it in different places, isn't it?
Yeah, the Abhidhamma philosophy can be found in Samyutta Nikaya and so forth. And the word Abhidhamma can be found in Sutras and Vinaya. But some scholars would say the Abhidhamma in Sutra and Vinaya has a different meaning. It specifically emphasizes on the 37 Bodhipakkhya, like the 37 factors of enlightenment. So this debate is going on in the world. So when the Theravadians say the word Abhidhamma has been used in the Theravada tradition, so that they would say it with a different meaning. So some scholars say the Abhidhamma existed in Matika form, like the Kusala Dhamma and so forth, like as it was done in the Dasuttara Sutta. The Sariputta's, Venerable Sariputta's way of explaining the things in some places. So Buddha has praised this very highly. So then some would say the Abhidhamma got developed with that. According to the tradition, it was uttered in the Tavatimsa realm, and it was solid after the 7th Vasa. But some scholars say, these are not traditional scholars, specifically the Western or who are thinking out from the Theravada tradition, they would say there was a Abhidhamma philosophy was there. Because Abhidhamma philosophy can be verified in sutras, especially in Samyutta Nikaya. And also Dutiya Vihara Sutra is what the Venerable Buddhaghosa brings as evidence to say that the Abhidhamma did exist during the Buddha's time. So the Rupert Gettin, a very renowned Buddhist scholar, suggests that he would say, though it's a matter of fact whether Abhidhamma existed in this original form from the Buddha or not, it's just a matter of fact, something that we have to investigate, but the idea had to be there, because otherwise how could all the suttas could be combined with each other. So I put it as fundamentals normally. I don't put it as Abhidhamma, I would say the fundamentals of the tradition. Then, so he would say the Abhidhamma did exist and it came into the form of a book later. Then some say it started after the first council, some say it started after the second council, and obviously it was there before the third council to some. So no one would say Abhidhamma developed in Sri Lanka. So therefore, because when you come into the Sarvastivadi Abhidharma, who diverted from the Theravada sect, diverted away from the Theravada sect, Theravada group I would call, they also have Abhidhamma, 7 books, but written by different 7 Theras, not by the Buddha, and they have a different version of Abhidhamma, the number of Chetasikas and all these things. So historically, when you go into this, we have a completely huge miscellaneous type of teachings when we come into the sects. So that's why without going into this historical proof or without going into advocate like this is the only truth, it's what for the stance I take is just consider this as a tradition, because there are a lot of arguments about this in the world. So just study this as a tradition. If you find it is more, because it has explained that vipassana from A to Z, but that is not to say that the other traditions don't have. So they explain A to Z. If you find it very logical, we can adopt it and practice.
Just one little thing.
Yeah.
Bhante, I think you mentioned at the beginning when you were explaining about karma, the potency is existing, but something else is. I didn't remember what exactly the other. What is not existing, but potency is existing.
Karma itself is not existing, I would call. Karma itself is not existing. Because how do we verify?
Potency here. So the potency means that also should be a nama, right? Some kind of a nama.
No. It's just it's one kind of a state, like anusaya. Anusaya do exist, but it's not in the form of a mental state. It's sort of a potency. So how do we explain this? I'll come into that in a future lecture, maybe in a Q&A session also. If you raise the question, you have to think about the karma, energy and anusaya. We explain it from this side. So when we explain from inward into outside, inside to out, it seems like we are explaining substances. But when you go to the commentary literature, we have an explanation from outside to inside. So when we deeply think about what the commentary says, in the end, we sort of find some sort of a potency connected with the mind. It's not just a law, it's not just a dhammata. We sort of find some kind of a possibility, sort of an energy sort of thing. So that's why Theras like Lady Sayadaw or Rerukane Chandavimala Mahathera, Sri Lankan renowned scholar, and also the Burmese teachers, they would explain as a Pottikamma or the Anusaya as a certain stage, the Kamma force and so forth. Because when you look now, the same thing happens in Nirvana. According to the Theravadians, there are two explanations about Nirvana. Non-arising of the non-arisen defilements, realities is one way of explaining Nirvana. And Nirvana has a completely different state. So we have to merge these two to understand. So likewise, normally Theravadian says Anusaya does not exist in a mental form or physical form. Even the Kamma doesn't exist. But when you look into that, we find a possibility of energy, potency. So for that, we have to explain it in both ways. Then we can have an insight about this idea. I'll do it in future if you raise the question.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. So, we still have like 3 or 4 questions in one hand. So
shall we take it, because we have a ceremony here in the monastery.
Oh,
so
okay,
people have come to
yeah,
offer something. So we'll take it to the tomorrow's class. Yeah. So please, Dr. Ryan, if the questions are put in the chat box, please. I would be greatly appreciate if you can keep them and raise them in the first place tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Okay, thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you tomorrow. Buddha sasanang chirantittatu, Buddha sasanang chirantittatu, Buddha sasanang chirantittatu, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.